for 43.
Thank you, Madam President. This item is about the rent payments on Smith Wills Stadium. This goes back to our the item that came before us back on the 18th of January in 2024. The vendor that had a contract with Smith Wills came before us and was asking for some relief on the situation he was renting Smith Wills Park for. Had a contract to lease it, I guess is at least the proper terminology. Some things have come to light since that time where the council voted in favor of that to give him relief on what he had agreed to initially, which was a payment of $125,000 a year for the use of Smith Wills Park. And so, because of some things that have come to light, I've got a number of questions that I'd like to ask, and I provided Attorney Martin some of them yesterday. But one of them was the vendor back in January of 2024, was he in default on the contract? I can give you some more of these questions.
Yeah, no, the one at a time is probably better. To my knowledge, no, but I don't know that for certain. I wasn't dealing with the contract at that time. What I can say more generally is there were certainly payments that weren't made timely, and there was a modification to the contract that was negotiated sometime late last year. I think it was only executed recently. But that modification, which was approved by the council, cited to or recited what payments had been missed and set out a payment schedule for him to catch up on those payments. There was also a credit of some sort, for lack of a better phrase, that was provided because of work that had been done by the group to the stadium in terms of upgrades and so forth.
Okay. The contract called for a performance bond. I think it was for $5 million. Was there in fact a performance bond?
I haven't been able to find the answer to that yet.
Okay.
And Mac was just here. Mac will probably know, but I hadn't been able to get the answer to that one yet.
So
but you're right about the contract. It is in the contract.
Yeah, and so the performance bond will be for a way for us to get paid the money we're due. That's the reason you have a performance bond, is so that if for some reason the vendor is not able to pay the performance bond, insurance company will pay you the proceeds. Now, at that point in time, I think we were due about at $125,000 a year. The contract went into effect, I think, 2019. That would have been about $500,000 that had not been paid. My understanding is we've been paid about $32,000.
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact payments, but what you're asking about in terms of the performance bond, that's generally correct. I don't know. I wasn't part of. I'm not trying to pass the buck here, but I wasn't part of the negotiations. I don't want to speculate, but it looks like we didn't move on the performance bond and instead went with the modification to try to get the payments caught up that way.
Okay. Another question that comes to mind is we evidently in the negotiation we went through to come to the meeting in January the 18th, a lot of the obligation or debt, if you want to call it debt, that he owed the city was forgiven to come up with this new modification. Is that something we can legally do?
I don't think it was forgiven, I'm basing this only on the contract and the modification. But as I read the contract and the modification, the debt wasn't forgiven. It was more the equivalent of two things. One was sort of think of it as a like-kind transaction. So first the city said, here are the improvements that were made. It's my understanding there were some meetings where receipts were gone through and confirmation of these expenses were established, and credit was given in lieu of payment for those improvements. And then part two was beginning with this modification, as soon as it is executed, if it hasn't been already, there are specific calendar dates laid out for making back payments to continue to catch up, as well as making the payments that are now due.
Okay. And the one that's, I think, was surprising to a lot of people when they found out about it was that sometime, I guess in March or so, it came to light that the vendor had signed a contract with the Veterans Administration, the VA hospital over on the other side of, over there on Woodrow Wilson, on the other side of the interstate, for overflow parking in the parking lot at Smith Wills, for which the VA is paying him. This was, I believe, this contract occurred in 2021, and the contract is for $370,000 a year for, I think, 5 years, or it may be longer, but it's at least $370,000 a year for 5 years. Now, my question is, when we went into the negotiations, and granted you weren't the attorney there, did anybody in the city know about this VA contract that was paying the vendor $370,000 a year?
I can't speak to that. That would need to be something either from the administration or planning, perhaps, that was involved in those talks. I did check to try to find that contract. I haven't found it yet, but I know there's some internet reports of it. I don't have any reason to doubt those reports or trust them one way or the other. But I don't know what was spoken about in the negotiations, because the first role I had in this was looking at this amended contract.
Sure. So if you assume that in fact is the case, that he does have this contract with the VA for $370,000 a year, then you have to wonder, that is a material for a contract that called for him to pay us $125,000 a year. That is a material omission. I think he had an obligation, if he signed this contract 2 years ago, to let the city know that he was making $370,000 a year on parking for the parking lot there adjacent to Smith Wills Park.
I certainly think it's a reasonable question to ask. I don't know if that's something that Jack can address, but it's a reasonable question to ask. I just don't know the answer.
And I wonder that, you know, if he doesn't have the performance bond, if he hasn't made the payments that he was due for the past 4 years, if he doesn't have the performance bond, which was a requirement of the contract, then the next obvious question would be, should we just void the contract altogether and take back Smith Wills Park, and with it the VA contract for $370,000 a year?
So to get farther into that would probably be an executive session question, but the question of whether the contract would be terminable and whether that's a wise choice, again, I hear the question and I'm happy to discuss it.
No, I didn't expect you to answer that.
Sure, I understand.
But it is an important question, and it's something that we need to get to the bottom of. I feel like we've been taken advantage of. If the contract, in fact, is with the VA is true, then I think we've been taken advantage of by the vendor. And I think it's worth us pursuing, because $370,000 a year to the Parks and Rec Department, if we put it into the Parks and Rec Department, that's a healthy addition to the budget they've got to cover all the different things we're trying to do. We can't complain about not having, you know, Parks and Rec and food for the zoo if we turn and don't pursue a contract like that is out there.
Thank you, Mr. Foote. Mr. Banks?
Yeah, I'm not going to speak to the VA and that, because I'm not aware of that. I just wanted to just bring back from memory one of the reasons why we reduced his payment was because of the amount of upfront money that he proved or showed where he made investments in Smith Wills. I, for one, because I use it with MISA, Mississippi Youth Sports Association, can vouch to the shape of the bathrooms. They were deplorable. I can vouch to the foundation damage at the top and the bad painting, but it just wasn't done. I do know that there were significant upgrades done. I do know that there were partnerships with the Hank Aaron Sports Academy and the Atlanta Braves. I actually went when the Atlanta Braves came. I do know that there are some people that weren't pleased because there were certain historical figures of color that were painted on the as a mirror out there at Smith Wills, especially when we talk about some of the people that used to do business who were upset and saying all this other kind of stuff about it. And so, you know, when it comes to that, you know, I would say that Mr. Timothy Bennett, with the history of what he's done on the Gulf Coast, and with the history of what he's done with minor league baseball, is an outstanding person. And I think that if there are significant questions before we just try to find a way to oust people, especially people that are bringing a historic change to the city, that deal with people of color, I think that we should come sit down and let's talk about and all being clear about what's happening. That's all I say on that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Banks, any other comments on this? I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Banks. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Flood, are you?
I will get a copy of the contract, VA contract.
Turn your mic on.
Per Dr. Omari's request, I'll get a copy of the contract and get it to her in the legal department.
All right, thank you, Mr. Foote. All right. Let's see, next, Mr. Foote, is yours, demolition